Have you ever had one of those moments as an adult where you suddenly realize maybe my childhood wasn't as normal as I thought it should have been? Because I have. And the funny thing is, when you're a kid, you don't know that you're living in dysfunction. You just think that's what happens at everyone's house. And this is what everybody does when they're at home. And my mom, she was a young mom. She was a teenage mom before teenage pregnancy was famous enough to get its own TV show. She had my sister at 17 and me just after she turned 19. So 2 kids before 20. But she was smart. She was really smart. She would eventually earn her GED and she built a short-time career in the mortgage industry because numbers made sense to her. But raising children, that was a different story. When I was little, having a young mom actually felt exciting, but it's all I knew because she had all of this energy and we would spend entire weekends at the park. We would hike all the trails, swim all the lakes, and sometimes her friends would meet up with us and we would have cookouts at the park and we would play until the park was shutting down. And mall trips were practically a weekly event. And sometimes she would invite her friends over to the house, and if they had kids, then it was an instant new playmate. And she would let us ride our bikes all over the neighborhood as long as we promised to stay together. And when you're a kid that's less than 10, that feels like freedom. You feel like you are in top of the world, but every freedom comes with a price. And I didn't recognize that until years later. When the sun went down, that is when the parties started. Tejano music, beer, sometimes street medicine, and adults laughing until the sunrise. While the kids, we fended for ourselves. We raised ourselves. We fed ourselves. We put ourselves to bed. And at the time, we didn't mind because we had each other. We made our own fun. We thought, this is normal. All the kids that we go to school with are doing this. And it wasn't the parties that hurt us the most. It was the mornings after, the hangovers. Because my mom, when she would finally go to bed right before we woke up, she wasn't the kind of mom who got up early to make breakfast on a normal day. Definitely not the kind of mom that made breakfast on a hangover day. And she made sure that we understood what do not wake me up meant. And so we didn't, even when we were hungry. And one morning, my sister and I decided that we would make peanut butter sandwiches because simple enough and we were hungry enough, except we didn't have peanut butter. We rarely had groceries. So what we did have was peanuts, and you guessed it, butter. Now, we are less than 10. So we had crushed those peanuts as fine as we could, and we mixed them into the butter with all the determination of 2 little girls could muster. We would take turns stirring and stirring, but it never turned into peanut butter. And so we honestly thought, well, maybe it just needs time to turn brown. So we waited. And around that waiting period, my mom woke up. And not because she's like, let me feed my kids, but because she had heard us making a mess. And she spanked us for wasting her ingredients because now she didn't have peanuts or butter. And then she asked us, why didn't you just wake me up if you were hungry? Well, honestly, and the truth is, we tried. We already knew how that usually ended. Her yelling at us and then getting spankings. Weekends became that predictable. She would sleep and my sister and I would wait for her to wake up. And sometimes when she would make us lie in bed with her for hours because if we were next to her, she didn't have to worry about us making a mess. Imagine being a little kid where you're wide awake and you're hungry and your job is that you have to lay perfectly still and perfectly quiet so that your parent can sleep. But that was my normal. And we also didn't talk about what happened at our home with anyone ever. She had programmed us not to. And my grandparents, they helped her with rent and bills and whatnots. And sometimes they even brought us groceries. And our Catholic church was a weekly stop because we would get food from them. And my mom had already told us repeatedly, you don't tell anyone what happens at our house, especially on the weekends. And so we didn't. And back then, the food pantry boxes, they weren't filled with complete meals. You were likely to get mostly cereal, powdered milk, a block of cheese, and some vegetables. They weren't like today. It was enough to survive, not enough to thrive. And looking back, I think I became so used to being hungry that hunger felt as ordinary as a Texas summer. It's hot, yet you have no choice but to endure it, because that's what I thought hunger worked. That's how I thought hunger worked too. And the strange thing about childhood is children normalize whatever they're raised in. So I assumed every mom slept all day because they partied all night. And I assumed that every family struggled to keep food in the house. And I assumed that every little kid learned how to stay quiet so that the adults could sleep and they wouldn't get angry, because that's all I ever known. It would take me years to realize that that wasn't childhood. That was survival. And that's the day that I realized that my childhood was anything but normal. If you ever looked back on your own childhood and you realized something you thought was normal wasn't, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And sometimes healing begins the moment that we realize we aren't the only ones. And if you'd like to hear more stories from my childhood, some heartbreaking, some hilarious, but all true, I hope you subscribe. I'd love to see you back for the next story time. I'm April. I'll see you next time.